Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today we're talking about Saul's topic is favorite gaming system.
Right. And the grand winner is, actually, there's no grand winner. As I was trying to figure this out, I figured out that I don't have a favorite gaming system, mainly because there are different reasons why I like some gaming systems over others.
He asked me the question and I went, okay, you can tell me whatever your favorite gaming system is, but I like to roll different kinds of dice for different things.
Right. So I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the polyhedrals when I was picking my list or thinking about it, because right off the top of my head, the latest, greatest for me has been Year Zero's engine.
And it's different varieties.
So for me, when I was thinking about it, I'm really love the idea of Tales from the Loop because of all kinds of factors. One of them is the simplicity of it. It's a dice pool game. It's D6s. Everybody understands what a D6 is. Everybody's familiar with a D6. We talked about it before. And you add your skill plus your attribute. You add that number, and that's how many D6s you roll. And all you need is a 6 to succeed. Very easy to explain the system. Very easy to make a character. And as I said in the past, Tales from the Loop is the only game so far in the 30 years that I've been running games at gaming conventions, that I make characters at the table.
Okay.
And the reason that is because usually you can make them like 15 minutes or less. If you have all these handouts that I make, which are the archetypes, and I have maybe 2 copies of the archetypes, and there's maybe, oh man, I don't remember, but there's like 8 or 10 archetypes that you can use to make a character. And they're basically almost made characters. What it does is it helps you focus or pick out what kind of character you want to make. And like I said, it takes 15 minutes to make a character for a whole table to make characters. And I think that's pretty valuable in a role-playing game, especially at a convention.
So it's a dice pool system.
Right.
It also has mechanic. Each one of those has a different mechanic for, in Savage Worlds, it's called a Benny, right?
Right.
And what do they call? Well, I know in Alien, it is your stress.
Right.
So you can add dice or remove dice?
Add dice. Well, they call it a push mechanic.
Yes, push. That's what it's called.
Well, and they all have the same basic fundamental idea of how many dice to roll, or it's a dice pool of some sort. And then they all have the add attribute to skill. And I'm talking about all the Year Zero engine games, or new Year Zero engine games. And what happens is that if you roll a 6 on any of those, you succeed. But all of them have a different push mechanic to illustrate the differences in each genre of game.
For Tales from the Loop, it's you get tired, right?
You get tired, or you get mental stress.
Yeah.
And you're playing kids, right? You're playing in my book little kids. You're playing 11 to 14-year-olds.
Tweens.
15-year-olds, I believe. 15, because
Tweens and early teens.
Yes. And so you're playing these kids, and it is very it's part of the game that your kids cannot get killed, which
they can get tired, which is the way that age is, right? They're great, and then they're really crappy because they're hungry and tired.
They're hungry, they're tired.
And by crappy, I mean they're whiny and stuff and want to lay down.
There's all kinds of conditions they can have, and once all the conditions are exhausted, so is the kid. They're out of play until they can regain some of those.
They need to take a nap, sleep through the night,
or have a talk with an adult that they care about. So there's all these things that give you stress, and there's ways of alleviating stress in Tales from the Loop. And it's all very innocent. It is probably another reason I like it so much, because it hits that nostalgic vibe for me, because it's based in the 80s. It is a kid's game. It's also an investigation game, which I really like investigation games. I mean, I think for me, at a con and even at home, investigation games are probably my favorite now, because it's not so much centered around violence or violent or killing encounters. It's much a different vibe for me, and I think it just you use your brain more when you're investigating, and it's neat when players come up with all these ideas of how to figure out things, and I like those games a lot. So it's it is an investigation game. It's 80s. It hit all the right things about how the 80s were, but also what they do is just not just an 80s game, but it's also they add a little bit of the fantastic with super science and stuff, robots,
There's other Year Zero engines. I mean,
games. Yeah, yeah. But I think Tales from the Loop for me is probably the pinnacle for ease of play and everything else. Yeah, Coriolis is in this
there's also other dice pool systems.
right, which kind of throws me for a loop, sort of, right?
You're such a dork.
So when I was thinking of Tales from Loop and I was thinking dice pool systems, I'm like, well, there's Shadowrun is a dice pool system,
It is.
and it is quite fun. Though
It's a very crunchy system, though.
it is very crunchy, even though it's a simple. You add an attribute and you add a skill, and that's how many dice you roll.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost the exact same as Tales from the Loop. But is it as easy as Tales from the Loop? Absolutely not. Because every different what is it? Yawn?
Sorry.
Every different
Character type.
or every different action is a different system. For fighting, it's a different system. Magic, it's a different system. Hacking,
Oh, it's not a different system. I mean, it's the same system. It's a dice pool.
it is a dice pool, but how you
How you put them together.
how they put them together, and there's all these rules of especially with magic and stuff, and magic and what is the other one? A technomancer. You gotta figure out how much force you're gonna use, so which is I believe is a very cool aspect of that game. You get to decide how much force the spell's gonna have.
You choose it yourself. It's not like
Right.
you're saying, well, I'm going to throw this 5th level spell. You're saying, I'm going to use a force of 6, and that could actually kill me. So,
Or knock you out, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is you can throw the spell, but then depending on the strength of the spell, well, it doesn't matter how the strength. Depending on the strength of the spell,
that's how many dice you have to roll to see if you're going to, what you're going to do to yourself, how tired you're going to be,
Right.
if you're going to have consequences. So each dice pool for doing doing magic in Shadowrun, the force that you use adds dice to be able to do greater damage, but it also adds dice to be able to
Resist.
cause you pain,
to resist they call it
to resist the,
like burning out.
yeah. It's the same for technomancers. It's the same for, isn't it the same for deckers where they have to do an opposing roll to it? Or-
Well, Decker's a little bit different again, and that's why it's a lot more complicated than Tales from the Loop. And that's what I mean by every different thing that you do in Shadowrun, it has its own system because it works sort of the same. You're still rolling attribute, you're still rolling plus your skill, but there's all kinds of things that you have to think about when you run it. So, though it is a dice pool system, it is D6 based, just like Tales from the Loop. I think it falls further down in the favorite system because
I don't know about
it's more
that.
complicated.
I think a lot of people like complicated.
Yeah.
For me, I would say I like both of those systems. I like both of those two different kinds of dice pool systems. I like the complicated one because it's fun to watch the people at the table doing the math in their head and
Yeah, but do
talking
you
to
like
each
doing
other.
it?
I don't have to. I can just I either have it written down if nobody's gonna explain it to me, boy-splain it to me, but the boys love to get into that aspect of it, right? How
crunch the numbers.
to crunch the numbers and figure out, if I do this, I get to add these dice, but it's going to do this to me. I might get hit harder, that kind of thing. They love that. So I can see the benefits of both of those systems, both of those dice pool. I like dice pool systems, and I think those are two great examples of complicated and non-complicated.
I will give you that. And even in the Year Zero engine, there's different games that come out. Coriolis is a little bit more complicated than Tales from the Loop. Alien is also Year Zero engine, and it's a little bit more complicated than Tales from the Loop. And then they kind of tweak the rules a little bit, and instead of just using D6 dice pools, they just use the polyhedral dice, and they just use 2 dice instead of a handful of dice. Now, I've only played Blade Runner, and there's another one called Twilight 2000 that uses almost the same system with just single die types. Or you throw 2 dice, but there's only one for your attribute and one for your skill. And I like it because there's not so many dice hitting the table, but at the same time, it doesn't feel as satisfactory as throwing a bunch of dice. But at the same time, I like the use of the polyhedral, so I'm kind of torn between that kind of system. I think the die pool system from the 6-sided die pool system for me is just a little bit more satisfying, seeing a few dice hit the table.
Well, if you want to talk about polyhedral dice, I think we should talk about I know I was going to go with a different one, but I want to go with the 2D20 systems.
2D20. Wow, I hadn't thought about that one.
I like because it's got Star Trek, Conan. What's the other one?
Mutant Chronicles. Now Dune.
And also John Carter from Mars. And all of those games, the 2D20 system is really fun. I like the 2D20 system. I like they also have a push mechanic where you give your dice. If you do really good, you can put one of your dice into the
momentum pool.
The momentum pool
right.
for everybody to use.
I totally forgot about that one. I hadn't even thought about it when I was thinking of polyhedral dice. So let's move on. Another reason I like systems is because I like the polyhedral dice. I mean, when I first started playing D&D, they used polyhedral dice, and back then it was a little bit harder to get. They were crappy dice usually, but I still have that joy of rolling a D12, a D10, from D4 to D20. I love all those dice. I didn't really get into like Dungeon Crawl Classics that uses like a D30, a D24. I'm not even sure there's a shape for that. But anyway, they have all these different kinds of dice because they really go into the up a die step. So
well, the D&D system with the polyhedral dice has to be one of my favorite because I love all the different dice.
When I talk D&D, I'm talking about every incarnation of D&D, every edition, except for 4th, because I never played it, but I figure it functions almost the same way as every other D&D game. Obviously, there's some people that love it, some people hate it, but for the most part, it stays, well, for the most part in my book, it stays at D&D at the core. You're rolling D20 to hit. There's different die types for damage, the D12 for a long sword or two-handed sword, and D6s for daggers or darts or whatever. So you're just using all those polyhedral dice, and it still has the same basic game mechanic. You roll in D20, you're rolling against armor class, you're rolling against saves for spells and stuff like that, and all these other things. So that basic idea doesn't change. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the idea of how they change the rules on it, and it's more like a miniature game, trying to appeal to people who play computer games and all this other stuff. It didn't matter. I never really played it. I don't even own a single book of it. So
you're talking about fourth edition,
but it's still D&D. You still have the multitude of polyhedrals that you use. So I'm going to include it in there, even though I never played it and never really read it. It got a lot of flack for what it tried to do, but I know people have really enjoyed it.
But the system, we're talking about the system.
Yeah, but the basic system is still D&D. So for me, the polyhedral dice is all about D&D. I love rolling those dice. So for me, D&D is still one of my favorite game systems.
I do too. I like knowing the AC or whatever number you have to hit and rolling my D20 to try to hit it.
Right.
And then knowing what happens afterwards, I get to roll other dice to do damage, or
right.
Sometimes you have to do a wisdom check, and you have to roll certain, you have to get different things.
You were telling me that you really like the idea of the D4s because
I do a magic missile. One of my favorite spells. You get to roll the D4 when you when you hit, you get to roll the d4 for the damage.
Oh, they automatically hit too. That's a fun
Yeah.
part of the magic missile. I think magic missile is probably every magic user's favorite spell from the very beginning because it was the only one that magic users can throw and effectively always be able to do damage. Because
It's not very much damage, but you can do damage.
yeah, it's just sometimes they would get like a spell save, so they can save for half or even save to not get hit by your spell. So a beginning magic user, magic missile is like the one to have.
Yeah.
So D&D still sits pretty well in my book as far as one of my favorite game systems because of polyhedrals. But you mentioned the 2D20 system, and you're right. I really like the system. I think each game that uses that is a little bit different. Like John Carter from Mars is probably the easiest one to use, and Conan and let's say Mutant Chronicles is probably the hardest ones to use because there's all these rules that are attached to playing the game.
I think that has to do with the IPs, right? For those like Conan, there's things that they wanted you to have to do, right? To
try to emulate.
To come out as a Conan adventure, right?
Correct. And I think Conan was first. I'm pretty sure. I always get this confused. Either that or Mutant Chronicles, but I think it was Conan. And then Mutant Chronicles came out, and Mutant Chronicles kind of was tweaked for a more science fiction game, right? And then
Star Trek.
Star Trek is obviously based on the Star Trek universe. And you really liked that when we were doing the playtesting for it before it came out. And I really liked it. I really thought it did well. And the whole idea of the
I like it because it's 2D20s, right?
Yeah.
Everything is 2D20s, and I like that. And plus, then you get the momentum pool.
The momentum pool, I think, is the real, the heart of that game. Because it is that thing that, let me explain what the momentum pool is, right? So when you try to succeed something, you need to get so many successes. And sometimes you get more successes than you need. So you could use those extra hits.
And you can give that dice into the momentum pool.
Or you could use them. You could use them and get extra damage or get an extra effect. Or you can put them in a dice pool. And what that does is that it saves that D20. It basically saves that D20 for you to use later. But it goes into a pool that is available to everybody, all the players in your game. So other players can add to that dice pool and the momentum pool. And I think depending on the game, it can have as many as 5 or 6 dice at any one time. And what happens is, as you add dice to the momentum pool, it's going to have extra dice in there for other people to use. And what happens is when you really need to succeed, like
you gotta cross that bridge.
Scotty has to realign the lithium crystals, or the spaceship is going to blow up.
You need your shields to stay on.
You really need to succeed. And you don't want to gamble of not succeeding because the result is the explosion of the ship. So you can take dice from the
momentum pool
and add them to your throw, and it increases your chances of succeeding. So that's really neat.
And it's a really great component because you would think that you would be able to succeed, but sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes it's not going to happen. And you really do need to share those momentum dice with people
or you don't want to risk not getting a success. Yeah.
Because no matter what, when you're rolling the dice, there's a chance that you're not going to roll well.
And there's also the same within that whole idea of the momentum pool. You could also give the dungeon master, the GM in this case, they call them in Conan's Doom.
Yes.
And basically it's a chit that they can use to like thwart your character in game.
Which is really hard, and that's one of the things about Conan is that you really have to do stuff right. So you end up giving Doom points or Doom dice to the...
I call them, we use chips, so...
To the
GM.
And then you never know when they're going to come back and their guys aren't doing well, or they want to throw something else at you, or you're
Yes.
not going to
Or
succeed.
they want to act first is a
Yes.
good one.
Yeah.
And so what happens is it is this game currency that goes back and forth sometimes. Because sometimes the GM will give you, he goes, I want to give you this complication. Or,
Yeah.
yes, I want to give you this complication. I'll give you a Doom chip. It wouldn't be a Doom chip. It'd be like a Benny of some sort. And I think that itself is pretty cool. Some people don't like the idea of this game mechanic currency, but I like it because it kind of mimics that idea of saving your bacon when chances are really bad, right?
And also-
in games, in stories,
Yeah.
in books and movies where the hero or heroine, just hits that lever that opens the cages with their knife or something. It gives you that kind of a win.
And it also gives you the idea that anything can happen at any time because the GM can use those doom,
Yeah,
the
he
doom,
does, yeah.
right? He can
Right.
use it.
And though the GM could use that, can do anything they want, basically. But when he has that stack of doom and he takes this one doom
Yeah.
chip off his stack and puts it down on the table and says, I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to do this to your character, or I'm going to take the initiative and stuff. There's a reason why. It's not just some arbitrary,
Right.
You gave him all this doom.
And you see the if you're using the chips, you
Yes.
see them sitting there.
Yeah, you see him sitting there, he like starts sweating. But the reason I think my brother runs a good Conan game is because he uses those chips.
Yeah.
And he in his game, in his Conan game at the con, he had like a pile of chips, and then he started using them, and he was just like, the players like, oh, every time he reached for that pile, they're like, who gave him all those chips? They were yelling at each other. It was pretty fun. It was and pretty funny. So I really liked the momentum pool a lot, and I like they call it different names, but the Doom mechanic,
Yeah.
the Doom pool, the chips, or whatever you want to call it. I think it looks work, and it's a 2d20 system. You're always throwing two 20-sided dice to succeed, and it's a roll under, right?
Yeah.
You add your attribute plus your skill. That gives you a number that you have to roll under. Pretty neat. I really like that one. I had forgotten completely about the 2d20 system.
I think the other system you were going to talk about was percentile systems.
Ah, yes. I really like the idea of percentiles because you're rolling a D100, right? You're trying to get a number between 1 and 100. And you could have a D100 die. They exist. I don't think they're real viable because they roll forever, right? Because they're basically like a tennis ball. No,
They're pretty big.
like a golf ball,
Yeah.
like a big golf ball, and every little dimple is a number. But most people just use 2d10s, and one's marked as the tens, and the other one's the singles.
I've only played in two percentile systems:
Call of Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu and Space Opera.
Right, and Call of Cthulhu. There's another system that is also made by that company called Rune. I don't know if they're made by, but they used to put out RuneQuest, which is also a D100 system. And the reason I say I like the D100 system, percentile system, because it's just that when you tell somebody you have a 50% chance of success, they can understand that very clearly, whether they've ever played a role-playing game or not. You have a 90% chance of success. They're like, oh, wow, I got a good chance. You have a 5% chance of success. You're like, oh, those chances are so good, aren't they? So, I mean, it just flat out, there's no trying to figure out, well, this or that. There's just, everybody can understand that. Now, whether it's really that easy to roll that number that you need to roll, I don't know. I'm not a statistician or into statistics to be able to throw you that, or not even statistics. It's also probability, which makes my head spin. I really do like that system. I played Call of Cthulhu a few times, and it does work really well. I really do like it. And of course, my character really sucked. Usually, it was only a few elements that she was good at. Well, luckily, it was Call of Cthulhu games. He was good at
doesn't really
like
matter.
history and stuff like that, since he was a history professor, and he had some pretty good numbers. He couldn't lift anything or fight or worth a lick, but hey,
There you go.
You're not gonna fight Cthulhu monsters out there.
So that's the percentile system. It's pretty.
Right.
It sounds easy. It depends on the game.
Well, yeah, yeah. It sounds easy, but like space opera kind of makes it a little bit more complicated.
Well, space opera has charts and all kinds of different things, right? So,
It's not. Okay, I was gonna say it doesn't really have charts, but yes, it does.
so, but still, it doesn't matter because it's a percent. It's the 100 D100. So you know someone's going to tell you, and I always ask, am I supposed to roll over or under? That's all I need to know, and tell me what the number is, because basically that's what I need to know is between 1 and 100, and I need to know what I'm rolling.
Usually it's under. It seems to me. I have not seen a D100 system where you have to roll over, but I'm sure they exist. Just to be odd.
The other system that would be the 2D6 system.
Right. And for the longest time, I hated Traveler, right? For the longest time.
He associated all 2D6 systems with Traveler.
Well, that's all it was, really. I don't remember anything else using 2D6. But then there came the explosion of the SRD and people using, it became like, I don't know what it is, but I don't know what happened. I think there was this idea that you couldn't, well, no, not this idea, but you cannot copyright game mechanics. And what that means is as long as you don't use any original ideas or written words, you can use any dice mechanic to make a game. You don't have to have permission. There's no copyright on that. So you can do it. But then they figured out, well, we can just let people do it and give them, the rights to do it or permission, even though they don't really need it. But I think it made with the OGL caused this explosion and other people looking at different systems and saying, I want to try to build a game around it. And sort of that's what happened with Liminal, right? It uses a 2D6 system. I really like the way Paul Mitchner wrote that book. It makes it easy to understand. When you read Traveler, the original Little Black books, not recently, within the last few years, we played in a Traveler game where we had to make characters. And I remember it being this real simple process. But when I was reading the books, it was so confusing. I was like, no wonder people thought we were strange. It was very hard to understand the way these books were made. And we talked about it when we talked about Traveler in an episode where people back in the 80s didn't know how to write a rule book, right? It was just trial by error. You just presented all that information and hopefully people understood it. Original D&D is very much like that also. I tried reading the little 3 books and it is kind of confusing a little bit. So we were trying to make characters and we're like, what does this mean? I go, well, I can't believe it's so complicated. So I read this, like, I forget what paragraph it was and what was it about. And we're like, I have no idea what that means. So I think that 40 years of people writing rule books.
The rules have gotten better.
Rules have gotten much clearer and easier to understand. Even as an aside, we were talking about Carbon Gray. And that uses the D6 system that was used in Star Wars. And the person who did a review of it, who had played the D6 system, I've never played it. I own the Anniversary Edition, but I've never really looked at the rules. That person said that after reading Carbon Gray rules, which is the same system, and they tweaked it a little bit, it is much easier to understand how to play and run the D6 system from Star Wars from reading the Carbon Gray. And that has to do with, like I said, that was the 30th anniversary edition, and that was a few years ago. So you're talking about older games being more difficult to understand simply because there was just no manual on how to run or write a role-playing game rules.
And yeah, it can be very complicated.
Right.
I think the 2D6 system, besides Liminal, which is a great game, there's Feng Shui uses 2D6, right?
Right. No, well, it uses 2D6, but
one is good and one is bad.
One is negative and one is positive. And that is like really simple, right? I really like the simplicity of that. Some people may not because it's not.
The 6s also explode.
Yes. And, but some people think it's just too simple, right? It's just too arbitrary. There's no way to hack or number crunch. What do you
You
call it?
don't really need to though. In Feng
Yes,
Shui.
true. That's true. So it's a totally different game. It's an over the top type of the game. Characters are doing things, amazing
I
things.
consider it to be a 2d6 system because you use 2d6. But then that's just me.
Yes, yes. It's not a 2d6 system, but it is. You do throw 2d6s.
Well, that makes it 2d6 system to me.
Right, right. So I think what happens when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about maybe there's one game that I truly like, but with all it's just in dice mechanics, just the dice systems caused me to think. Well, we were talking about systems. I was like, I really like Tales from the Loop, but there's so many other things to consider when I'm trying to choose a system that I like.
I think it comes from the fact that we play a lot of different games with
Right.
different systems. Whereas if you're the person that has only ever played D&D, that's going to be your favorite system. It would be easy for you to say what your favorite system is, right?
Right.
Or if you only played Savage Worlds or you only played...
Or even if you only play like 2 or 3 games.
Right. You could pick one.
Right.
But since Saul makes me play all different kinds
I
of games...
make her play. Yes. I think that's my problem.
I don't think it's a problem.
But I don't think it's a problem. I think I do enjoy different game systems. They represent a different way of looking at role-playing games.
And it also makes it depending on the game you're playing, you can find the good and the fun part of each system, right? What a dice pool system is different from rolling the different polyhedral dice
Right.
or why 2d6s is okay, where you don't have to play, you're not going to kill your character as you're making them because it's not Traveler. You can play other 2d6 systems, right?
Right. And all that deals with probability and statistics. And that's, I've said it before, that is nothing that really concerns me too much. But it is important because it tells you as a player and as a GM how hard it is to succeed or how easy it is to succeed, and that tells you what kind of game it is. So, like, for example, Feng Shui is over the top. You're doing crazy, amazing things. And so this D6, these two D6 that oppose each other works fabulously. Because every once in a while, you're just going to, like, do really good, and sometimes you're just going to...
Biff it.
Right. And that's
But that
perfect for
makes
that
the fun.
genre.
That's fun in that game, right? I
Right.
want to run up that wall.
And sometimes you make it.
Sometimes you don't.
And sometimes you don't.
And then you just got to depend on your other players to figure out how to save you.
To pick up your body.
Yeah.
So I don't have a favorite gaming system. I do like different gaming systems for different reasons.
So there you go. Good luck on this. On whatever gaming system you like is the right one for you. And it's always good to try different ones.
I believe that is true. You should try different games. Even if it's something that you may not like, just go and play it. Try it at a convention. Play it at a game store if they have games available. I think it's worthwhile to try different games and see how different game mechanics can change the feel of the game.
There you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul,
and Jolene.
and you have a good day.